Hello and welcome to the channel NPA Discovery that takes you beyond the textbook and deep into the lives of the most complex and fascinating historical figures. If you've ever believed that greatness often comes with a hidden cost, that behind every celebrated act lies a soul wrestling with its own truth, then you are exactly where you belong. Today, we journey into the life of a man who, for a brief moment in time, was considered the living embodiment of American heroism, Sergeant Alvin York. His actions in World War I turned him into a national legend, a man who single-handedly turned the tide of a battle and captured the imagination of a country. But what happened after the medals? The parades, the fame, let me tell you, that story might just break your heart. Because while Alvin York saved lives on the battlefield, he spent the rest of his life struggling to save himself from the weight of that legacy. Before we dive in, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. It's your support that allows us to continue sharing these untold stories with the respect and depth they deserve. Alvin York was born into a world of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind born of poverty and struggle. Born on December 13, 1887, in rural Tennessee, York was one of 11 children raised in a two-room log cabin. Life in the Pall Mall area of Fentress County didn't offer the luxuries of modern society. In fact, it barely offered the basics. He grew up farming, fishing, and hunting, not for sport, but for survival. His education was brief, not because he lacked the intelligence, but because his family needed him at home. And yet, within this hardship was a foundation of discipline, resilience, and responsibility. The quiet hills of Tennessee shaped York into someone who understood struggle not as a temporary hardship, but as a way of life. That understanding would define everything. When York's father passed away in 1911, the burden of providing for the family fell squarely on his shoulders. He was just 25. He took on jobs that demanded everything from him: blacksmithing, logging, railroad construction. This wasn't just about earning a living, it was about holding his family together. But hardship has a way of creating both virtues and vices. York developed a reputation as a heavy drinker and a frequent brawler. The same determination he showed in protecting his family he took into the local bars. He drank to forget, and he fought to feel alive. One of those fights ended with the death of a close friend. It was a moment that shook him to the core. A man transformed. In 1915, Alvin York attended a revival meeting that would change the course of his life. The preacher's words struck him not just in the mind, but in the soul. It was as if someone had taken all of York's pain, his guilt, his confusion, and pointed him toward grace. He left behind the bottle, the barroom fights, and even became an assistant pastor in his small church. From then on, York sought peace and faith and lived a quiet, moral life. But the world had other plans. In 1917, the United States entered World War I. York, a man newly committed to nonviolence, faced a staggering moral dilemma. He didn't want to kill. His Bible told him not to. When he registered for the draft, he wrote that he did not want to fight, but the government had no room for nuance. His request to be exempt as a conscientious objector was denied. So, he appealed. And though the historical record is mixed about whether York himself submitted the forms, his internal conflict was painfully real. A man who had found God after a life of violence was now being asked to return to the very path he had rejected. It was a conversation with two superior officers that would become a pivotal moment in York's transformation. They sat down with him, Bible in hand, and showed him examples of justified warfare within Scripture, wars fought for justice, for the protection of others. It made him pause. Then it made him decide. York concluded that fighting in this war could be a form of divine service. And with that, the man who once rejected all violence stepped onto the battlefield, the fog of war and the fire within. June 1918. France. By the time York landed on foreign soil, he was a changed man, but not yet the legend the world would come to know. Alongside his fellow soldiers in the 82nd Infantry Division, York entered what would become one of the deadliest campaigns of the war, the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. This was not a clean battle. It wasn't organized or glorified. It was mud, blood, and chaos. Soldiers died not just from gunfire but from exposure, disease, and confusion. Trench warfare blurred the lines between strategy and survival. For York, the moral questions never disappeared. But now, they had faces, his comrades, men from Tennessee, Ohio, Pennsylvania. His brothers in arms. Then came October 8, 1918, a day that would etch his name into history. York's unit had orders to take control of a critical railway cutting near the town of Châtel-Chahiri. The Germans were dug in on high ground with machine guns, perfect vantage points to shred advancing troops. And shred they did. The initial assault was a disaster. York's platoon suffered heavy casualties. His commanding officers were killed. The attack faltered, but York didn't freeze. He advanced. Creeping through the brush and taking cover between bursts of machine gun fire, York began picking off German soldiers with the precision of a man who had hunted game to feed his family. He called out to them in German, asking them to surrender. Some did. Many didn't. According to later reports, York killed at least 20 enemy soldiers and captured 132 more, by himself. His own words are humble, even haunted. There was nothing left to do but fight. And I did. The weight of glory. When York returned to the American lines, he brought with him more than 130 German prisoners. His fellow soldiers could hardly believe what they saw. It was the kind of feat that belonged in mythology. Not modern war, and yet, it was real. So real that the U.S. Army awarded York the Distinguished Service Cross. Then they reconsidered. His heroism, after all, warranted more. The Medal of Honor was bestowed upon him, the nation's highest military distinction. But what happens after you've reached the pinnacle? York's return home was met with parades, celebrations, and press coverage that turned him into a national icon. He had gone to war as a reluctant soldier and returned as a hero. But all York wanted was peace, a quiet life in the hills of Tennessee. Fame, however, has a way of refusing silence. He married his sweetheart, Gracie Loretta Williams, and was gifted a farm by the people of Tennessee. But the gift came with complications. The land wasn't equipped, and York had to borrow money just to make it functional. The man who had refused to profit from war was now drowning in debt. He once said, "I could get used to almost any kind of hardship, but I'm not fitted for the hardship of owing money." In the end, it wasn't the battlefield that broke York. It was the burden of being a public figure in a world that expected perfection. He spent years advocating for education in rural Tennessee, forming the Alvin C. York Foundation. But even that came at a cost: exhaustion, public scrutiny, and political friction. And yet, he pressed on. Fame, film, and the fight at home. Despite his longing for peace and obscurity, Alvin York couldn't escape the spotlight. Even as he retreated into his rural life, the world was watching, and waiting. Journalists came knocking. Biographers came calling. And eventually, so did Hollywood. For years, York resisted the idea of a film about his life. Offers poured in from the studios, but he declined them all. He worried that the realities of war would be glamorized, that the moral dilemmas he faced would be glossed over in favor of sensationalism. And more than that, York was still trying to reconcile what he'd done on that battlefield. He didn't want to relive it through a camera lens, but there was something else brewing inside of him, something that did call him to action: education. York had seen what a lack of schooling could do to a person. He had lived it. He believed that ignorance was one of the greatest enemies of the American people, and he devoted himself to changing that. In the 1920s and 30s, York founded the Alvin C. York Institute, a school intended to serve the children of the Cumberland Plateau, an area still steeped in generational poverty, but noble causes need funding. York didn't have the money. So, for the first time, he reconsidered Hollywood. In 1940, with war once again looming over the world, York agreed to the filming of Sergeant York, a major motion picture dramatizing his life. He personally negotiated the contract to ensure the story stayed true to his values. He insisted that the proceeds would go toward funding his school, not into his own pocket. Gary Cooper was cast as York. The movie was a smash success, becoming the highest-grossing film of 1941 and earning Cooper an Academy Award for Best Actor. But the film's success wasn't just about ticket sales, it carried a powerful message: America was on the brink of entering another world war. And York's story, retold at just the right moment, became a rallying cry for unity, bravery, and sacrifice. People didn't just watch Sergeant York, they believed in it. They believed in him, but York didn't bask in the glory. He took to the road, advocating once again, this time not just for education, but for national defense. At a ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier in May 1941, he gave one of the most stirring speeches of his life. "By our victory in the last war, we won a lease on liberty, not a deed to it," he said. "Now it's time to renew that lease." America listened. Just months later, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States entered World War II. A hero returns to battle, this time at home, as the 1940s unfurled their dark wings across the globe. war once again called out to the world, and this time, Alvin York did not wait to be summoned. The release of Sergeant York in 1941, just months before the US officially entered World War II, had a staggering impact on public morale. It wasn't just a film. It was a message. At a time when Americans were torn between isolationism and international responsibility, the story of a reluctant hero who found purpose in battle reignited the country's spirit. York had once been that hesitant soldier himself. Now he stood tall, urging his fellow citizens to answer the call once more. And when he spoke, people listened. He traveled across the country, delivering speeches that were more than mere words. They were reminders of what was at stake. At the tomb of the unknown soldier in May 1941, York gave one of the most powerful speeches of his life. By our victory in the last war, he declared, we won a lease on liberty, not a deed to it. He spoke not of vengeance, but of responsibility. Not of hatred, but of duty. He had once been a pacifist who shunned violence. Now, he was a voice calling his country to its highest purpose, to defend freedom, not just for themselves, but for the world. President Roosevelt quoted him often. Gary Cooper's portrayal of York was everywhere. And for a brief moment, Alvin York was not just a symbol of the last war, he was a rallying cry for the one just beginning. But as York stirred the nation to action, he also tried to do something most Americans would never hear about. He tried to re-enlist. Despite being in his mid-50s and suffering from lingering health problems, York wanted to go back into battle. But the army turned him down. His body was no longer up for the fight. So, instead of leading soldiers, he led speeches. Instead of carrying a rifle, he carried the weight of inspiration. He helped sell war bonds. He toured training camps, speaking to young recruits who had grown up hearing his name in schoolbooks. To them, he wasn't a legend. He was a living proof that even the most ordinary man could rise to extraordinary heights. He was Sergeant York, through and through. But war doesn't end when the guns fall silent. And York's final battles would not be fought overseas. They would be fought in the quiet corners of his own fading health. From 1948 onward, York suffered a series of debilitating strokes. His vision failed. His body weakened. And by 1954, he was bedridden, confined to his home in the Tennessee hills. The man who had once charged enemy lines now depended on others for even the most basic tasks. Yet even then, the flame of purpose burned within him. He continued to write. He dictated letters. He advised his foundation. He listened to news reports with an unbroken sense of duty and curiosity about the world. And when people visited him, he didn't speak of the Germans he fought or the medals he won. He spoke of education. Of God. Of the young men and women whose futures he still believed were worth fighting for. He died on September 2, 1964. But if you ask those who knew him, he never really stopped living for others, a legacy etched in courage and complexity. Alvin York is remembered today as a hero, but that word feels too small for the life he lived. He was a sinner and a saint. A brawler and a preacher. A man who once couldn't afford shoes, and later walked through the White House. A soul so tormented by the act of killing that he nearly refused to go to war, and yet so courageous that he saved countless lives by doing just that. What makes Alvin York's story unforgettable isn't just what he did in the Argonne Forest. It's the life he built around that one moment. He didn't cash in on his fame. He didn't sell his story for personal gain. Instead, he built schools. He gave speeches. He tried to save the next generation from the very world he had to survive. In an age that often confuses celebrity with legacy, York reminds us what true greatness looks like. Not loud. Not arrogant. But humble. Devoted. Unwavering. He saved lives on the battlefield, and he saved more in the years that followed. So, if you ever wonder whether one person can make a difference, remember Alvin York. A poor boy from Tennessee who changed the course of a battle, and maybe, just maybe, helped change the course of a nation. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that even the quietest voices can echo through history. And if you'd like to support our channel and get access to exclusive content, check out the link in the description below. We can't do this without you. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and never forget the power of a single life to change the world.